All that Kody Brown constructed has utterly collapsed as a judge has forever banned him from Coyote Pass. The astonishing court ruling has just emerged, and the harsh reality of it will leave you amazed. Stop whatever you are doing. This is quite possibly one of the most jaw-dropping Sister Wives rulings ever. Kody Brown, who was previously the self-dubbed head of the Brown family, is forever banned from Coyote Pass. Forever. The judge's gavel has come down, and the dream intended to bring the family together has officially become Kody's greatest embarrassment. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Reality Recap. But it only gets more incredible. This prohibition didn't come from nowhere. It is the result of weeks of legal theatrics, hair-trunching testimony, and deep, long-hidden secrets. Coyote Pass fans have been wondering for months what really went down at the ranch. Now they know, and it is worse than anyone ever dreamed. Let's go back. Coyote Pass was going to be Kody's masterpiece. When the Brown family moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, Kody drew a picture so big, so broad, it seemed impossible not to believe him. He towered over that barren desert landscape and boasted to his wives, children, and cameras that this would be their home forever. He promised room for all of them, a plot of safety for Tristan Garden, reedy land for Janelle, space for Meri so she would not feel left behind. And of course, the lion's share for Robyn, whom Kody said needed stability for her kids. But it is much simpler to make promises than it is to keep them. As Kody talked about unity, equality, and shared dreams, behind the scenes, cracks were beginning to develop. Money disagreements, secret bank accounts, and nepotism quietly poisoned the vision. What was supposed to be a representation of family bonding became a field of betrayal. Fast forward some years, the property still sat vacant. No foundations had been laid, no walls constructed. Rather than constructing houses, Kody was constructing anger. Tristan was the first to make a public pronouncement, openly confessing and informing Kody himself that she had lost hope in the vision. She disclosed that each time she brought him up short regarding Coyote Pass, he would sidestep, delay, or deflect. Shunnodui, ek at. For her, the property had become a means Kody employed to keep others in submission. Janelle, a longtime devoted fan, finally broke out in confessions of her own frustration. She had put up money, given up security, and waited patiently, and nothing panned out. And when she realized that huge sums of family money were being funneled into Robyn's mansion rather than Coyote Pass, the dream edged further and further away from her when the courtroom were finally started. Tempers were hotter than the Arizona desert sun. Tristan and Janelle were elated, ready to take on Kody like never before. This wasn't a battle over money. It was about justice, dignity, and the truth. Imagine the setting, the courtroom electric with tension, fell from the hallway. There sat Tristan and Janelle, calm but determined, their lawyers with stacks of documents, receipts and contracts at the ready. Meanwhile, Kody and Robyn seemed visibly shaken, but forced a hardy veneer. Onlookers hunched forward, reporters jotted down notes, and each gasp seemed to reverberate like thunder. It was less a court hearing and more a cliffhanger season finale of an addictive drama, except that this had no script. As the judge walked in, silence. Everyone understood that today would determine the fate of Coyote Pass and Kody Brown's legacy. Tristan was the first to present her opening statement, which set the tone. Standing upright, voice firm, she spoke to the court. When we bought Coyote Pass, it was for all of us. We invested our money, our energy, our dreams, but Kody made promises and compromised them. He threw money into Robyn's house while expecting us to wait. He raised expectations and led us to believe in a dream he never meant to fulfill. Gasps breathed through the courtroom as Tristan's voice shook, not from vulnerability, but from years of repressed rage finally unleashed. She didn't tell her story, she lived it for everyone to witness. She remembered nights begging Kody for answers, questioning whether her children would ever experience the dream home they had been promised. Excuse took the place of truth and manipulation for love. Now she demanded responsibility. Then there was Janelle. Wary as Tristan was the heart of the testimony. Janelle was the backbone. With mathematical precision, she unfolded documents containing financial records, indicating how money from all four wives had been allocated. She stated that each wife was to have an equal share in Coyote Pass, but Kody was said to have signed documents transferring the remainder elsewhere. Receipts indicated money going into Robyn's mortgage account, and Coyote Pass remaining unscathed. I worked day and night for years, Janelle assured the court, her voice firm and unshaken. I invested in this family on Kody's assurances, only to discover my sacrifices supporting someone else's comfort, and my children receiving nothing. That is not what we bargained for. The court was ablaze with whispers. The fans had long wondered about nepotism, but now it was in black and white before the judge. Kody finally testified, his trademark confidence visibly rattled. He maintained that each decision was made with the best interests of the family, stating Robyn's house needed to be built first in order to give stability to her kids, and that Coyote Pass remained the long-term vision. But the judge asked him another question. Why, after all these years, had nothing been done on the land? Why were the other wives waiting while Robyn was safe? Kody's responses stumbled, becoming defensive and even angry. At one point, he became loud, insisting, "I am the head of this family. I make the decisions that are best for everyone." Instead of bolstering his argument, the comment boomeranged. Lawyers for Tristan and Janelle jumped on it, claiming, "Leadership without fairness is nothing but domination." The courtroom visibly concurred, nodding in agreement. The judge listened intently to every word, reading documents and studying demeanor. This trial wasn't about paperwork, it was about trust. Whether Kody had kept his word or broken it. At one point, the judge interrupted Robyn's sobbing appeal, declaring firmly this court hears facts, not feelings. That sentence cut through the tension like a knife, announcing that the ruling would be based on reality, not compassion. Finally, after days of testimony and hours of evidence, the time had come. The judge pushed their glasses up onto their nose, scanned the papers, and rendered the verdict. The room fell silent. Tristan and Janelle clasped each other's hands, leaning forward. Kody turned white, his bluster deflated. Robyn's eyes were puffy from crying, praying softly under her breath. And then the gavel came down, ringing out through the room, and the words were everything. Shunnoshat, shunnochar. Kody Brown is banished forever from Coyote Pass. Shunnoshat, shunnoat. The courtroom exploded, gasps, whispers, and even a couple of cheers. It was final. The man who had dominated everything for so long had lost the very terrain he had promised as the symbol of family harmony. And this was only the beginning. Courtrooms are for wars, but what went down between Kody Brown and his ex-wives Tristan and Janelle was not just a war. It was a war of money, loyalty, and power. Coyote Pass wasn't land. It was supposed to symbolize unity, each wafer piece of the dream. But it turned into the tool Tristan and Janelle used to unveil Kody's betrayal. And with the mounting evidence, the court became an emotional battlefield. Each word, each document, each memory was one of betrayal. Coyote Pass had been bought with joint efforts by all the wives. Every penny counted. Tristan sold her house in Las Vegas to invest. Janelle sold assets for her portion. Even Meri pitched in, but less with time. Shunnoat, shunnochar. And what they received for it was nothing. The property sat vacant year after year as Kody and Robyn's ways became increasingly opulent. The irony was bitter. Tristan and Janelle had exchanged security for a pledge that never materialized. When the case finally came to court, their fury had boiled down to unshakable determination. They weren't simply wanting justice. They demanded the truth. Testifying again, Tristan's words sliced like a knife. This was supposed to be our land, but rather than share it, Kody took it all for himself. He didn't give us houses. He gave Robyn a mansion. He used our finance to create her life and told us to wait. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with righteous anger. She talked of how Kody used Coyote Pass as bait, promising us constantly that things were going to get better and never did. He instructed me to wait. He promised the land was our future, but the future never came, she explained. Tristan blamed him for employing the land as leverage, an instrument used to keep the wives economically and emotionally tied down. To her, it wasn't betrayal. It was manipulation in the guise of leadership. Janelle, soft-spoken and unruffled, didn't mince words. She had the proof. Bank statements, property deeds, financial records, all presented by her lawyer on a huge board in front of the judge. The courtroom leaned forward as the timeline emerged. Family money was gathered into a joint account, then somehow vanished, only to pop up again in Robyn's mortgage papers. Speaking steadily, Janelle accounted for every transaction. "We trusted Kody to handle finance fairly," she said. "We believed the money was for Coyote Pass instead. He used it to fund Robyn's home without our consent. That was never the plan." Her words carried undeniable weight. It wasn't accusation anymore. It was documented proof. The judge, who had remained largely silent until then, finally sat forward. "Brown, why were family money sent to one wife's residence, and the others left with nothing?" Kody tripped. He had talked about Robyn's children needing stability, the interruption of moving, and how the other wives could wait. His rationale served only to bolster Tristan and Janelle's argument. Their lawyers contended hotly, saying this wasn't partnership. It was favoritism that Kody had installed himself as a dictator of family money. Each word made Kody's defense weaker. He maintained he had always intended to build up Coyote Pass, but every justification was undermined by tangible proof. When confronted as to why no permits had ever been submitted for building on the property, he replied the family was not prepared. When asked to explain why Robyn's mortgage was more important than even small development at Coyote Pass, he became angry, asserting his role as head of the family. But rage can't destroy paper trails, and the record said otherwise. The turning point occurred when Tristane's lawyer questioned Kody on cross-examination. Text messages were presented where Tristane was begging for a status report on her promised house. Kody's reply: "It is not your turn yet. Wait patiently," the attorney pushed. How is it not her turn when she contributed as much as or more than Robyn? Kody attempted to deflect, insisting that Tristane was unstable and focusing on her home wasn't smart. The courtroom gasped in horror. Tristane's lawyer did not hesitate. "So it is not about fairness. It is about punishment." That statement turned the tables. Kody looked cornered for the first time. Robyn, who had been silent until now, cried, begging the judge to consider that Kody was fighting for the family and that Tristane and Janelle were distorting the facts. But instead of sympathy, her tears ended up playing against her. Tristane interrupted abruptly. "This has nothing to do with tears. It has to do with the truth." The judge nodded, reiterating that truth always prevailed over feelings. Robyn's case fell apart against the evidence. Each individual in the courtroom sensed the drama, gasp, whispers, even headshakes were inside the room as each new discovery was made. Some of the Brown children who were there to bear witness looked devastated. All those years of suspicion were finally confirmed. The funds intended for their homes had been channeled elsewhere. Tristane and Janelle were being heard for the first time. Their sacrifice, frustration and heritage were recognized. Their lawyer summed up assertively. "This isn't just a dispute over property. It is about promises unfulfilled, trust betrayed, and two women who gave their all to be left with nothing. The court needs to act not only to safeguard their rights, but to make sure manipulation can't take the place of justice." Kody's attorney tried to plead it was a miscommunication, that Kody had always planned to do the follow-through, but the harm was already done. The narrative was clear, cut, and the evidence was compelling. By the close of the session, it was clear who was in control. Tristane and Janelle hadn't just presented their argument. They had laid waste to Kody's credibility. The courtroom that once witnessed Kody as the patriarch of a big family now witnessed him laid bare. A leader who had promised equality, but who practiced favoritism. A husband who had claimed love but exercised control. A patriarch who had spoken of oneness but had sown discord. As the gavel came down to recess the court for the day, one thing was certain. This battle over dollars and power was no longer just a family skirmish. It was a battle that would define the future of Coyote Pass and Kody's name for all time. In every courtroom battle, there is a moment of truth, and Kody had been counting for weeks on one individual to soften his public image, to make his actions human. That individual was Robyn. She was his pick, the wife he constructed a mansion for, leaving the rest behind with promises unfilled. If anyone was going to persuade the judge, it should be Robyn. But in court, truth has a tendency to penetrate through tears. And when Robyn finally stood before the judge, her testimony, intended to save Kody, broke apart under the pressure of evidence, contradictions, and the relentless wrath of Tristane and Janelle. The courtroom was silent as Robyn reluctantly made her way to the witness stand. Her eyes were already puffy from crying, a tissue grasped in one hand. Kody gave her a reassuring nod, but his own face reflected the panic brewing underneath. He needed her testimony. If she didn't provide it, his defense was falling apart. The bailiff administered the oath to her, and Robyn's lawyer posed the first question. "Mrs. Brown, why did you believe Kody behaved reasonably about Coyote Pass?" Robyn leaned in close to the microphone, her voice soft but quavering. "Ekchar, Pachek." Kody was attempting to do what he believed was right for all of us. He always wanted us to be able to have homes on Coyote Pass, but things kept holding him back. Financial losses, family drama, delays. He never meant to hurt anyone. She blew on the tissue and used it to dab at her eyes. Several people in the courtroom seemed sympathetic, but Tristane and Janelle's lawyers were prepared like hunters awaiting their prey. Tristane's lawyer rose from her seat, documents in hand, and the atmosphere changed at once. "Mrs. Brown, you state Kody acted on behalf of the family's best interests. Can you tell us why over the last 5 years, more than 4,000,000 worth of combined family funds was used to pay your mortgage? With no investment made for Tristane or Janelle, Robyn's hands clamped harder on the tissue. I didn't know the amounts. I thought the money was being spent on things we'd all agreed on. The lawyer cut in brusquely. And you didn't think to ask when your house was being bought with money donated by Tristane and Janelle. Robyn cast a pleading glance at Kody, but he looked away, jaw clenching. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Her defense was falling apart. Tristane leaned forward, not able to keep quiet. She knew, of course. We all knew something was amiss. Every time I asked Kody when my house would be constructed, he told me to wait. All the while, Robyn's mortgage was paid. The judge rapped the gavel to try to restore order, but the harm was done. Tristan's words stung like a blow, and the jury of public opinion, everyone sitting there, was already beginning to turn on Robyn. Robyn tried to regain her footing, leaning into her emotions. Her voice cracked as she spoke through tears. You don't understand how hard it's been. I've been attacked constantly by the public, by my sister wives, by people who think I'm to blame for everything. Kody was just trying to ensure my kids had a safe home. That doesn't mean he doesn't care about the others. Her tears rang out in the courtroom. For an instant, there was stillness. But not sympathy was their response, but rather disbelieving glance. Janelle's lawyer rose, speaking the clincher. Mers. Brown, emotion has nothing to do with this case. It is about justice. The facts indicate you lived well in your mansion, while the other wives were treated to nothing but mere promises. The judge nodded firmly. This court makes its rulings on fact and not on tears. Robyn's emotional shield had cracked. Kristen's team wasn't finished.